Because when you're alone as a kid, the monsters see you as weaker. You don't even know they're getting closer. Till it's too late.
Here. Take it.
All right, get to talk about It Chapter 1 and then eventually It Chapter 2, but we'll concentrate on Chapter 1 for now. So, this started out with it being, of course, the novel by Stephen King, and then, or the 1,000-page novel by Stephen King, and then it became a miniseries a couple years later, which I will say Tim Curry's performance in that is fantastic. He's great. It's Tim Curry, okay? So that's why it's great. I did like part 1. Part 2, not really. Not really. Because it just got really lame. But unfortunately, with that miniseries, why it's kind of, it can't really do as much as the book does is because it was on primetime television. So they really couldn't get away with a lot. They can definitely get away with a lot more now, but back in the early 90s, it was 90, they really couldn't get away with a whole lot. So luckily, 2017, they came back and said, hey, let's redo this and make it rated R and also make it a little bit more faithful to the story, to the book. And so that's exactly what they did. And when this came out, it was kind of the resurgence of R-rated horror films. Because at the time, studios really didn't have faith in putting, millions of dollars into R-rated films because they didn't think that it was going to make money. When, you had something like this, and then Blumhouse's revival of Halloween came out, and then that was making money. So this kind of kickstarted the R-rated horror trend again, which is great. So anyway, It Chapter 1. I was a little skeptical going into it because, one, the big change is with this, it's set in the 80s, where with the miniseries, it was set in the 60s, I believe, which it makes sense because it was of the time period. And so they wanted to, okay, what is 27 years of 2017? Okay, it'll be set in the 80s. So let's do that. So I liked that change. And of course they throw in all the 80s nostalgia and stuff like that, which they don't really throw in your face. It's more of it kind of in the background, which I feel like it should be done more instead of like constantly thrown in your face to like they're trying to shove it down your throat. With this one, it's kind of like you see it, okay, we're just moving on. So I liked that. But anyway, I went into this seeing it with a family member who is 100% scared of clowns. And I'll tell you this, on the drive to the theater, a family member was driving and they were actually shaking. Like their hands were shaking and I felt like the car moving a little bit and I look over and I see their hands on the steering wheel and they're just shaking. And I'm like, you don't have to do it. And they're like, no, it's fine. And let's just say I was there for like emotional support. And there were certain parts of the movie where it was like, oh, this is not good. So yeah, if you have a clown phobia, you probably haven't seen this. You're not going to watch this anyway. But I won't spoil it, but there is a scene where Pennywise one of the tactics he does to scare one of the kids, it is, your clown phobia is going to get kicked up to 100. And when it happened, everybody in the theater went, oh no. Like, that's not good. So, performances, really good. Now, one thing I think could have been toned down, and I'm not a stickler, like, for this. I'm, like, not gonna, like, poke sticks with this, but the kids do a lot of swearing. And I'm like, you kind of, I believe they were middle school, if I remember correctly. And I'm like, yeah, and you're swearing like a truck driver, like a sailor. I'm like, whoa, okay. I don't know where you learned that. So it's a little too much swearing in the dialogue department. Now, swearing doesn't bug me, but if you do it just constantly, like if you just say the F word just for no reason, and you just keep saying it over and over again, I'm like, okay, die down, please. But the performances were really good. Especially coming from Bill Skarsgard, who I thought did a fantastic job doing Pennywise, because he understood that Tim Curry's version of it is Curry's version. So he's like, all right, let's not repeat that. Let's do something different. And also, I think credit goes to the director, which is Andy Muschietti. He basically envisioned Skarsgard in the role, and then little known fact that probably a lot of people have heard, but when Pennywise's lazy eye, that is actually Bill. That's not CGI. That's actually Bill Skarsgard has a lazy eye that he can control. And so they were just like, hey, I think he should have a lazy eye. And Bill's like, oh, I can do it. And then just does it. And it's like, whoa, okay, that's pretty good. So I think Skarsgård did a great job. He definitely had some big shoes to fill, and I think he did a great job. The friendship between the kids, I think, is very well done. It feels very kind of Spielberg in a way, where they're all friends, but they each have their own like distinct problems. Both like in their family lives, but also like with each other. And I think they're able to capture it very well. This feels very like Spielberg in some regards, which then harkens back to the 1980s. So I really enjoy the movie. The scare, like the buildup and outcomes of the scares were actually really effective. Especially if you're watching it with a family member of yours that hates clowns. So if you watch this movie and you know people that are afraid of clowns and you somehow are able to persuade them to watch this, you're probably going to have a good time. They are not. And they're probably going to keep poking you with a stick about it for the rest of your life, but it's going to be an experience for you. But because I'm guilty of that. So I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. Now, the bad side is some of the CGI. They do, at times, put on too much CGI. And most of the time, it is effective. But at the same time, I understand that Pennywise, he's a shape-shifting alien. But at times, it looked a little too fake, especially when it came to CGI. Where with, something like The Thing, that was all practical effects, and it was supposed to look fake. It was supposed to look weird, and it worked. It worked in their benefit. I feel like if they went practical with it, I feel like it would have been a little better. But they also do some things in here where I'm like, yeah, doing this practical probably would have been impossible to do. So them using CGI, they used it very carefully, and it does work. So I don't want to hark on the CGI too much, but there are times where it does look a little fake. So, but, overall, this was a surprisingly really good adaptation of Stephen King's book. And the fact that the book is 1,000 pages, when this came out, and then at the very end they say, oh, it's chapter 1, I'm like, yeah, I kind of figured that. They just wanted to wait and see if this made money, and it made a ton of money. So after watching the miniseries, I thought they would never be able to pull off a more hardcore version of the book, but this did it, and they definitely do not hold back. They just go, hey, you see those kids? Well, we're going to mess them up because we don't care, because that's what the book is. And like I said, while the CGI is a little on the heavy, there's still enough like heart-wrenching, creepy moments to make your palms incredibly sweaty. You know, especially if you're a person that you see this and you're afraid of clowns. So they find a way to balance horror, but also, you know, comedy very well, drama very well, and also the friendship between the characters. They really do a good job at blending that all together, and I think the pacing of it is very well done. So, personally, I really enjoyed it, and so I give it a grade. Then, 2 years later, in 2019, we got It Chapter 2.
To the losers?
We made an oath.
Swear? If it isn't dead, if it ever comes back, we'll come back to it.
We didn't stop it.
Pennywise.
The clown. We can't let it happen again.
Hello?
Kid! Hello. Please.
So, It Chapter 2. Now, going into this, when I found out that they asked the kid actors from Chapter 1 who they wanted to play, who they envisioned themselves in the future, and what actors did they want to play themselves. And we got, 3 of them did show up. We had James McAvoy, had Jessica Chastain, and Bill Hader. Others were supposed to be Chris Pratt, Chadwick Boseman, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and I feel like I'm missing one more, but I'm probably losing it. Unfortunately, Boseman and Pratt were busy with the MCU. I don't know what Joseph Gordon-Levitt was doing, but McAvoy, Chastain, and Hader said yes. And so it was really cool. That was really cool. I will say, right out of the gate, the performances in this one, really good. I would, Skarsgard is still really good. As much as I think McAvoy and Chastain were really good, the one that surprised me so much was Bill Hader. I will say, McAvoy, Chastain, and Hader, they were the standout, but if I had to put one standout, it would be Hader. And Hader is quickly becoming just a really good dramatic actor. And I would be very much into if he does more horror movies. I would very much be on board with that, because he's super funny. Even when he was on SNL, he was still very funny. And when he then made the transition into more dramatic roles, like when he did the HBO show Barry, which is a really good show, but he breaks the mold of just being a comedic actor. And it also shows me that comedic actors can also be really good dramatic actors, like Bill Hader in Barry, or this. Chris Rock, I think, in Fargo or Spiral. Or even somebody like name is escaping me. Dave Chappelle, where he was in Star is Born. He was doing like more of a dramatic role, and it really shows me like, oh wow, they can actually do like really good dramatic, or in this case, horrific roles. So I really enjoyed that. And so the setups are, again, really creepy, much like the first movie. I think the setups were really creepy. Now, here's where I would get into the faults. while the setups were really interesting and really cool, they then chucked a whole bunch of CGI on the film. And to the point where I'm like, sometimes it works, and then most of the time that's just really silly. Like, that does not work. This looks half finished in some regards. So I really wish they didn't use more CGI. And I also understand that, they had another like 500 pages, like another half book to do. But then there were certain parts in it where I'm like, okay, you really could have sped it up, because this movie's almost 3 hours long. And while I don't have an issue with 3-hour movies or long movies, if your pacing keeps going, then I won't get easily bored. Something like Avengers Endgame, where that was 3 hours long. Not once was I bored, because it constantly something was going on. Its pacing kept going quickly. Where it was something like The Batman, that at times was slow. And I'm like, all right, I can kind of feel the 3 hours. This one, a little, it kind of blends between the two. Where I'm going, okay, there's parts in this that I'm a little bit bored, because your pacing is now getting really slow, and then they're able to pick it up kind of quickly. But there's still stuff in here where I'm like, I probably would have re-edited that, or probably just cut that out and just kind of skimmed it. And so I do feel like this is a little too long. I feel like if they cut maybe 15 minutes off and made it more like a 2.5 hour film, I think it would have been a little better on the pacing. Or just recut like certain parts to not make its pacing slow and potentially get audiences a little bit bored. But personally, that's me. I also feel like, harkening back to CGI, the climax was a bit cheesy. Like, especially, I mean, I don't know how much I can fault the movie for this, because the book was this, but also the miniseries had to do it. And even that just was like, this is just incredibly silly. Like, that is just really goofy and not really convincing as well. I mean, even Tim Curry said when it was announced that, it was going to happen, that a movie version of it was going to happen, he said, like, oh, I'm completely on board. I just hope that they fix the ending, because the ending of the miniseries is just really silly. And unfortunately here, it's still kind of there. While it does work in small doses for me, when they finally, I'm just going to say it, yes, they defeat Pennywise. But the way they do it was very like, okay, this is just silly. Like, what are you doing? Like, I don't understand what you're doing with this. So, personally, I think while I do have problems with this, I also can't deny that, the performances were great, especially like Bill Hader. He knocked it out of the park. I want him to do more horror movies. I think he'd be fantastic at it. And also check out Barry if you haven't watched that show. It is a very good show, and he's very good in it. He's very funny, but also very dramatic as well. Now, and also the setups too. I think we're very clever and very creepy. But the level of CGI, and then the fact that, most of the time it just looks goofy. The climax was a bit cheesy, and it was a little too long, and its pacing was a little slow. I have to knock this down to an average, where I feel like if all those things were a little better, this would be on par with the first movie. But unfortunately, it's not. It isn't on par with the first movie. But I will say this, that this chapter 2, I feel like, was better than part 2 of the miniseries. So, it's still able to be scary, but with the amount of CGI, it tinkers on just being goofy, and unfortunately, the climax just does that. But while it is a little too long, it still does a very nice job of concluding the story. Or not really, because they have an idea to do a potential chapter 3, and we have the Welcome to Derry miniseries coming out on Max, I believe, next year. So we have that to look forward to. But, you know, I would say these two are good representations of the novel. And I think if you watch both of them, you will not be disappointed.
If we stick together, we'll win.